In the summer of 1942, the island of Malta stood on the brink of starvation. Bombed relentlessly by Axis air forces and cut off from regular supply routes, the tiny British-held outpost in the Mediterranean was running out of everything: fuel, food, ammunition, even hope. Yet in late August, a small fleet prepared to break through the deadly blockade. It was Convoy MW-10, an operation so secret that even most of its own sailors didn't know the full destination until they were already at sea. The convoy slipped quietly from Alexandria harbor under the cover of darkness. 6 merchant ships, including the Clan-Ferguson, Brisbane Star, and Empire Hope, were escorted by a powerful screen of Royal Navy warships: the light cruiser HMS Naiad, the destroyers HMS Sikh and Zulu, and several smaller escorts. Their orders were simple but perilous: reach Malta or die trying. Every man aboard knew the risks. The previous convoys, Operations Harpoon and Vigorous, had seen devastating losses. German and Italian aircraft dominated the skies over the central Mediterranean, and Axis submarines prowled the depths like wolves. But this convoy, planners insisted, would be different. Signals intelligence from Bletchley Park had supposedly identified safe windows of movement, narrow gaps between Luftwaffe patrols and U-boat routes. Timing, not firepower, would be their shield. For the first day, the sea remained calm. Sailors aboard the Naiad shared tea and whispered superstitions about what lay ahead. Then, near dusk, a shadow passed overhead, a reconnaissance aircraft flying high and fast, too distant to identify. The men on deck watched it vanish into the sun. Hours later, British signal operators intercepted a short, encrypted Axis message: convoy sighted, south of Crete. Commander Henry T. Lewis of the Naiad was furious. "We left Alexandria under full radio silence," he wrote later in his private log. "No transmissions, no signals, yet they knew exactly where to look. Someone, somewhere, has been listening." By the second night, the mood aboard shifted from tense optimism to quiet dread. Radio operators noticed unusual static interference, short bursts that broke through Allied channels with unnatural precision. "Almost like someone's jamming us," said Petty Officer John Hale. The phenomenon was reported to headquarters, but no response ever came back. The convoy pressed onward, hugging the southern edge of Crete to avoid known air routes. The destroyer Sikh detected faint radar echoes, possibly aircraft, but they faded as quickly as they appeared. The Mediterranean moon cast a silver path across the waves, beautiful yet haunting. One sailor later recalled, "It felt like we were being watched, but by what, none of us could say." At dawn, a fresh message arrived from Alexandria Naval Command: "Maintain course. Reinforcements en route from Tobruk." The words were comforting, but the timing was odd. According to the logs, no ships had left Tobruk that morning. Lieutenant Commander James Whitfield scribbled a note in the margin of his journal: "The enemy knows we're here." But how? Aboard the Clan-Ferguson, Captain Walter MacDonald tried to maintain morale. He walked the deck, speaking with young gunners manning their 20mm Oerlikons. "Keep your heads, lads. Malta needs us." Yet even he sensed something was wrong. The usual daily communication from naval intelligence, short-coded updates confirming Allied aircraft movements, never arrived. It was as if the convoy had slipped into a dead zone, cut off from the rest of the world. One of the junior signalmen, a 19-year-old named Andrew Miles, later recounted how he saw a faint red light blinking across the horizon that night. Steady, rhythmic, too distant to be an aircraft. "It looked like a ship signaling," he said. But no one on the bridge could make sense of it. By the third day, the sea had grown rough, the ships fighting rising swells and fatigue. Still, they pushed forward. In the early hours, the Naiad's operators intercepted another Axis message, stronger this time: "Primary target approaching central sector. Air group ready." Captain Lewis slammed his fist on the table. "It's impossible. They know our route exactly." Later analysis, decades afterward, would reveal that German intelligence, using intercepted Allied communications, had indeed tracked the convoy's movement with chilling accuracy. Yet what remains a mystery is how they obtained the details so swiftly. Some historians point to an Axis mole within the Alexandria command center. Others believe the leak came through careless radio procedure. No proof was ever found. One line from a surviving diary of an engineer aboard the Empire Hope captures the mood of those hours. Every time the horizon darkens, we think of home. Every time the sun rises, we expect to die. As dusk fell on the third evening, the convoy entered open water south of Crete, the most dangerous stretch of its journey. The men could already hear the faint drone of aircraft engines somewhere beyond the clouds. Anti-aircraft guns were loaded and primed. The captain ordered blackout conditions. The convoy's position, though still officially secret, was no longer safe. Somewhere, someone was watching, waiting. And as the first spotlights flickered in the distant sky, illuminating what might have been enemy planes forming for attack, every man aboard knew that the battle for Malta's lifeline was about to begin. The morning sky over the Mediterranean was streaked with crimson as Convoy MW-10 pressed on, engines humming beneath decks and nerves stretched taut. The sun had barely risen when the first silhouettes appeared high above the sea, tiny black crosses against the light. German reconnaissance planes, likely Junkers Ju-88s, circled methodically, out of range of the convoy's anti-aircraft guns. The men aboard the British cruiser HMS Naiad watched them in grim silence. They knew what that meant. The Luftwaffe had found them, and the clock was ticking. For the crew, the tension was unbearable. Every sound carried weight, the distant hum of engines, the creak of steel, the shuffle of boots on deck. Petty Officer John Hale, manning the communications set, kept one ear tuned to the static-filled radio frequencies. "There's chatter on the Axis band," he warned. "They're tracking us." Yet when his superior officer tried to raise headquarters, no reply came. It was as if Alexandria had gone dark. Commander Henry T. Lewis ordered strict radio silence and tighter formation. The destroyers HMS Sikh and Zulu moved to screen the merchant ships, their guns ready. The convoy adjusted course, turning west by northwest, hoping to slip through the narrow corridor between Crete and Tobruk before German bombers could reach them. But the enemy had already begun their hunt. At 1,100 hours, the first wave arrived. A formation of Ju-88s dove out of the sun, their engines screaming. "Take cover!" shouted the deck officer aboard the Clan Ferguson as the sky erupted in bursts of tracer fire and smoke. Bombs fell around the merchantmen, geysers of water rising higher than the masts. One bomb struck the Empire Hope amidships, tearing open her cargo hold. Fire spread fast, licking up through the decks, fueled by the very supplies meant for Malta. The escorts fought back fiercely. The Naiad's 4-inch guns roared, flak peppering the sky. The destroyer Zulu maneuvered to lay down smoke screens while Sikh raced to rescue survivors from the stricken merchantmen. "It's like hell opened over the sea," one sailor later recalled. "The noise, the heat, the smell of oil and salt, it never left me." By noon, the attack was over. One merchant ship was gone, another heavily damaged, and yet the worst was still to come. Reports began arriving from the rear of the convoy. Enemy radio signals were jamming Allied frequencies again. This time, the interference was rhythmic, patterned, almost as if someone nearby was transmitting deliberately. In his war diary, Commander Lewis noted, "Our codes have been compromised. Either the enemy has broken them, or he's receiving our position through other means." He didn't know it then, but post-war records would confirm his fear. Axis listening posts in Crete had intercepted Allied signals relayed from an unknown origin near Alexandria. As repairs continued aboard the Empire Hope, Lieutenant Commander James Whitfield gathered his officers for a terse briefing. "They knew exactly when to strike," he said, voice tight with frustration. "They're reading our movements like an open book." The men around him exchanged uneasy glances. Was it a spy in Alexandria? A breach at Bletchley? Or something far simpler, an overlooked signal that had given them away? Despite the loss, the convoy pushed on. Malta was still 600 miles away, and retreat meant certain death. By late afternoon, the seas calmed, but morale did not. Sailors spoke in hushed tones about the eerie precision of the German attack. Some swore they'd seen aircraft appear exactly at the moment they changed course, as if someone was guiding them. That night, under blackout conditions, HMS Seek detected a faint blip on her radar, something following the convoy at a steady distance. The contact faded before identification, but the crew remained on edge. "A submarine, maybe," the captain muttered. "Or something worse, eyes that never blink." At 2,300 hours, a message crackled over the emergency frequency. It was brief, distorted, and chillingly clear. "They know your course. Turn back." The signal carried a British call sign, one belonging to a ship that wasn't part of the convoy. The message was logged and immediately reported to the NAIAD, but no explanation was ever found. The next morning, Allied intelligence denied sending any such warning. Officially, it didn't exist. One surviving sailor from the Brisbane Star later reflected on those hours in a BBC interview decades later. "We thought someone out there was trying to help us. Maybe they were. Or maybe they just wanted to see where we'd run." By dawn of the third day, Convoy MW-10 was battered but intact. The men were exhausted, their nerves frayed. The merchant ships carried on, their wakes stretching like scars across the sea. The officers gathered in the NAIAD's chart room, tracing their path on a faded map. Each red mark represented a point of danger, each circle a place where the enemy had known too much. Commander Lewis closed his logbook for the night with one final entry: "We are not alone out here. The enemy listens closer than we imagine." As the sun rose over the horizon, the convoy entered a new phase of its journey, one that would test not just their endurance, but their faith in the command that sent them. The sea ahead looked deceptively calm, but in the stillness, the men could sense the coming storm. The next attack would not be from the sky. At dawn on the third day, the horizon was clear and deceptively peaceful. The men aboard Convoy MW-10 knew better. They had seen the precision of the Luftwaffe's attacks, the strange radio messages, the eerie sense that someone, somewhere, was tracking their every move. Still, there was no turning back. Malta's defenders were desperate. The island had less than 2 weeks of food and only days of aviation fuel left. If the convoy failed, Malta might fall, and with it, the Allies' foothold in the central Mediterranean. The convoy tightened formation. HMS Seek and Zulu led the escort screen, their radar sets scanning the skies. The light cruiser NAIAD took center position to coordinate defense, her 4-inch and 40mm guns manned around the clock. On the outer ring, the merchantmen, Clan Ferguson, Brisbane Star, Empire Hope, and others, moved steadily forward, stacked high with crates of ammunition and oil drums lashed to their decks. At 0645 hours, radar operators aboard the NAIAD detected multiple echoes approaching fast from the north. Moments later, spotters confirmed visual contact, dozens of aircraft, their wings glittering in the rising sun. The Luftwaffe was returning, and this time in force. Sirens wailed. The convoy's formation shifted into defense pattern Zebra, the standard anti-air formation used in the Mediterranean. Smoke canisters were deployed, veiling the fleet in a gray shroud. Gunners stood ready, fingers on triggers, as the first wave of Ju-88 bombers dived from 10,000 feet. The attack was merciless. Explosions thundered across the sea. A near miss rocked the Empire Hope, splitting her bow plates. Another struck the Clan Ferguson squarely amidships. Her cargo of fuel ignited in a flash of fire that turned night into day. The shockwave rippled through the formation. Debris and burning oil rained down on nearby ships. Within minutes, the Clan Ferguson was gone, her captain and most of her crew swallowed by the sea. Amid the chaos, the destroyer Seek darted forward to rescue survivors, weaving between oil fires and drifting wreckage. Sailors threw ropes and life rafts into the flaming water, pulling men aboard while dodging strafing runs from low-flying Bf-110 fighters. "It was madness," one gunner recalled later. "We were hauling men out of the sea while bullets tore up the water beside us." Commander Lewis aboard the NAIAD fought to maintain control. "All ships, hold formation," he ordered over the TBS circuit, voice hoarse from smoke. "Do not break. Do not scatter." But discipline was slipping. The Empire Hope, heavily damaged and burning, began to fall behind. Her radio operator sent one last message before abandoning ship: Cargo lost. Continuing west. By midday, the sea was a graveyard of twisted steel and black smoke. The Luftwaffe withdrew briefly to rearm, leaving the survivors to count their dead. On the Naiad, chaplains moved quietly among the wounded. Some men prayed, others cursed, and a few simply stared at the empty horizon, waiting for the next attack. In the silence that followed, a chilling discovery was made. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield reviewed the convoy's plotted route and realized something uncanny. The Luftwaffe's attack patterns had matched their exact navigational shifts, almost minute by minute. "They're not guessing," he muttered to Lewis. "They're following our charts." Lewis frowned. "Impossible. Those were classified this morning." Later, in his war log, Whitfield would write a single line: "There's no such thing as coincidence at sea." As the day wore on, survivors from the Clan Ferguson were brought aboard the Sikh and Naiad. Many were in shock, their faces blackened with oil and soot. One of them, a young radio technician named Miles, told a strange story. Just before the attack, he'd picked up a faint English voice on a side frequency, reading out coordinates. "I thought it was one of ours," he said, trembling. The voice sounded familiar. But when pressed, he couldn't say who it reminded him of. That night, the convoy held a funeral service at sea. Dozens of men were buried beneath the waves, their names recorded in silence. The smell of burning oil lingered for miles. Before midnight, HMS Sikh reported a radar contact, a vessel moving parallel to the convoy, roughly 6 miles distant. The shape was consistent with a small destroyer, though no friendly ships were supposed to be in that sector. Lewis ordered flares fired, but no signal came in reply. The mysterious contact turned away and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, when the Sikh tried to re-establish radar contact, there was nothing. Just open sea. The surviving ships limped onward, shaken and bloodied. They had lost 2 merchantmen, dozens of men, and untold tons of supplies. But the mission had to go on. Malta was still waiting. Yet as the smoke faded behind them and the sea fell quiet once more, one truth began to settle among the officers. This was not merely a battle of ships and planes. Someone, somewhere, was feeding the enemy their every move. And before this voyage was done, the cost of that betrayal would grow even higher. Night fell heavy on the battered remains of Convoy MW-10. The sea was calm again, unervingly so, as if mocking the devastation that had unfolded only hours before. The surviving ships, HMS Naiad, the destroyers Sikh and Zulu, and 3 wounded merchantmen, crept westward under blackout conditions. No navigation lights, no radio transmissions. Only the sound of engines and the rhythmic slap of waves against steel. The men on watch were exhausted but alert. Every shadow seemed a threat, every echo across the water a warning. They were deep into the central Mediterranean now, beyond air cover, beyond hope of reinforcement. And still, the sense of being watched never left them. At 2130 hours, a faint transmission crackled through on an emergency frequency. Convoy MW-10, hold position. Rescue vessels approaching. The voice was distinctly British, calm, official, precise. But when the Naiad's signal operator requested verification codes, there was no response. Just static, then silence. Commander Henry Lewis immediately ordered all ships to maintain course. "No halts, no deviations," he instructed. "We respond to no one unless confirmed." Yet only minutes later, HMS Sikh reported strange light signals off her starboard bow, 3 short flashes, too long, the standard pattern for an Allied recognition signal. The ship altered course slightly to investigate. For nearly half an hour, Sikh pursued the phantom signal across the black water. Then, at 22:20, her radar went dead. The destroyer stopped responding to hails. The convoy slowed, scanning the dark horizon, but Sikh was gone. No smoke, no wreckage, no distress flare. Just an empty void where she had been. The silence that followed was suffocating. On the Naiad, officers gathered in the operations room, poring over charts and listening for any trace of Sikh's signal. At 22:43, a short burst of static came through on the convoy channel. 4 sharp tones, then a single word, following. It was Seek's call sign, unmistakable. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield stared at the radio operator. "Following who?" he whispered. No answer came. Meanwhile, the merchant ships pressed onward, unaware of what had happened to their escort. Crews reported hearing ghostly echoes of radio chatter late into the night. Brief fragments of voices, some in English, others in German. One engineer aboard the Brisbane Star later described it as two sides of a war whispering to each other through the same wire. By morning, the sun revealed a sea devoid of evidence. No wreckage, no oil slicks. Seek had simply vanished. The Zulu ran sonar sweeps but found nothing. Even the Royal Navy's post-war reports listed her loss as unconfirmed, presumed destroyed. Yet survivors from later engagements swore they'd heard Seek's call sign in the days that followed, echoing faintly across Allied frequencies. Commander Lewis recorded the incident in his diary that night. "We lost Seek to the darkness. It was no attack, no explosion, no panic. She followed something that wasn't there." Despite the fear spreading through the convoy, the mission could not stop. Malta's Signal Intelligence Unit had intercepted Axis chatter suggesting that more bombers were preparing at Benghazi and Sicily. The fleet had maybe 36 hours before another attack. The only hope was to reach the cover of British aircraft range by then. As the day wore on, the men worked in silence, cleaning guns, patching holes, counting their dwindling ammunition. The sea was eerily calm. Occasionally, they'd hear a faint hum far off the horizon, perhaps an aircraft engine, perhaps their own nerves playing tricks. Then, as dusk fell again, a final coded message arrived from Alexandria. It contained a single line, "Report position and bearing immediately." But the encryption format was wrong, one last used weeks before the mission began. Someone was using outdated Allied ciphers to contact them. Lewis refused to respond. "If they know where we are," he said grimly, "they don't need our help confirming it." That night, the convoy sailed through empty seas, haunted by the memory of Seek's disappearance. Sailors whispered theories in the dark, that she'd been sunk by a submarine, that she'd chased a decoy, that she'd been lured away by false signals. But the older hands knew better. Sometimes in war, ships didn't just sink, they were erased. From the deck of the Naiad, Lieutenant Whitfield looked out across the moonlit expanse and muttered to himself, "We're sailing into a trap, and we don't even know who set it." The next morning, just as the first light broke over the sea, the horizon shimmered with distant movement. Smoke, faint but visible, rising from the west. It could have been Malta, or it could have been the enemy waiting once more. The convoy had no choice but to find out. By dawn, the sea ahead glowed orange with distant smoke. For a moment, the men dared to believe it was Malta, their destination, their salvation. But as they closed in, the truth became clear. The plumes came not from the island's defenses but from burning wrecks. Another convoy, smaller and already destroyed, drifted in silence. The shattered hulls of merchant ships rolled on the swells like ghosts. The sailors of Convoy MW-10 knew then what awaited them. Only 4 ships remained, HMS Naiad, HMS Zulu, and 2 battered merchantmen, Brisbane Star and Empire Hope. The men were gaunt from exhaustion and sleepless nights. Deck plates were scarred with shrapnel, and the acrid smell of cordite clung to every surface. But orders were orders. The convoy would not turn back. At 0900 hours, Axis aircraft were spotted approaching from the northwest, this time, not reconnaissance but full assault. Italian torpedo bombers, SM.79s, streaked in low over the water. Their approach was so sudden that the Zulu's gunners barely had time to respond. The first torpedo struck Brisbane Star, punching a jagged hole below the waterline. She listed heavily, her crew scrambling for lifeboats as ammunition cooked off below decks. Commander Henry Lewis, aboard the Naiad, ordered the convoy to scatter, hoping to draw the attackers away. The ship's anti-aircraft guns thundered, filling the sky with black bursts. 2 bombers fell, but more kept coming. Shrapnel tore across the decks. 1 gun crew was wiped out in seconds. A near miss shook the entire vessel, extinguishing lights and disabling communications. Amid the chaos, the Empire Hope turned west, trying to escape. A signal flared briefly, 3 short bursts, supplies lost, continuing alone. Then, silence. No further transmissions. Her position was logged as last seen south of Pantelleria. No wreckage of the Empire Hope has ever been found. By midday, only Naiad and Zulu remained in fighting shape. They regrouped, engines limping, fuel nearly gone. The radio room aboard the Naiad picked up something faint on shortwave, a series of dashes and pauses, Morse code, barely discernible through static. A, S, H, A. Then the line cut. Lewis recognized the pattern, the beginning of Ashanti, the name of another destroyer expected to join them. But HMS Ashanti was hundreds of miles away, still docked in Gibraltar. Lieutenant Commander Whitfield leaned over the chart table. "Sir, if Ashanti isn't in range, who's sending her call sign?" No one could answer. At 1,400 hours, the Zulu detected movement on the horizon. A ship, small, fast, and unmarked, appeared from the haze, signaling with an Aldous lamp. The message was simple: "Follow me." The officers aboard Zulu hesitated. The vessel matched no Allied silhouette. Then, before any confirmation could be made, a formation of dive bombers descended from the sun. The Zulu took a direct hit aft. Flames erupted along her deck, ammunition detonating below. Her captain ordered abandon ship as the vessel began to list. Survivors were picked up hours later by the Naiad, though dozens were lost to the sea. Among those pulled from the water was an engineer clutching a charred signal pad. The last legible entry read, "Shadow ship guiding us west. Unknown origin." As evening fell, HMS Naiad continued alone. Radio contact with Alexandria was non-existent, and fuel reserves were nearly depleted. Lewis faced an impossible choice: turn back toward Egypt, where Axis patrols waited, or press forward into waters now swarming with enemy aircraft. He chose the latter. "If we fall," he told his officers, "we fall going forward." At 2010 hours, the final message from Naiad was transmitted: "Convoy destroyed. Continuing to Malta. God save the men of this fleet." Then, silence. Search efforts launched after the war failed to locate her wreck. Records from Axis pilots that day reported sinking 2 warships, but the positions never matched the Naiad's plotted course. Some historians believe she was struck at night and went down before a distress call could be sent. Others argue she never made it that far at all. In 1973, a NATO sonar survey near the Libyan coast detected a large metallic mass at 600 meters depth, consistent with a light cruiser of the Naiad's class, but the find was classified and never publicly confirmed. To this day, no confirmed remains of HMS Naiad, HMS Zulu, or Empire Hope have ever been found. What happened in those final hours remains one of the Mediterranean's most enduring wartime mysteries. As darkness closed around the last surviving ship of Convoy MW10, the men who still stood on deck looked toward the unseen island of Malta, so close, yet forever out of reach. The sea swallowed their wake, erasing every trace that they had ever sailed. In the weeks that followed, the Admiralty in London and the Mediterranean Fleet Command at Alexandria scrambled to piece together what had happened to Convoy MW10. Officially, the operation was listed as lost with all ships presumed destroyed. Unofficially, the silence surrounding its disappearance was deafening. No wrecks, no survivors from the last transmissions, and no conclusive evidence of the final battles. Even by wartime standards, the lack of information was extraordinary. Malta, against all odds, was eventually resupplied by later convoys, most famously, Operation Pedestal in August 1942. But the price had been horrific. Hundreds of sailors and airmen were dead, and the island's survival teetered on a knife's edge. The story of MW10, however, was quietly omitted from public briefings. It was as if the convoy had never existed. In 1946, when post-war naval records were reviewed, several analysts at the Admiralty discovered something peculiar. Entire signal logs for the convoy had been redacted or removed. Communications transcripts, navigation charts, and encoded messages between Alexandria and the fleet were missing. The surviving officers from earlier convoys to Malta, when interviewed, claimed they had never heard of MW-10 at all. One intelligence officer, Commander Paul Cunningham, later told the Times in 1962, "It was the strangest disappearance I encountered. Even the paperwork vanished. Almost as though someone didn't want the story told." Years later, declassified fragments from the Royal Navy's operations room shed light on what might have gone wrong. A set of intercepted Axis messages, decoded too late to save the convoy, suggested that the Germans had received detailed updates on MW-10's movements hours before the attacks began. The source was traced to a communications leak inside Alexandria Harbor. But the investigation hit a wall when the key officer involved in signals coordination, Lieutenant Arthur Mason, went missing in late 1942, presumed lost at sea. His disappearance was never explained. A surviving fragment of a diary, attributed to Commander Henry Lewis of HMS Naiad, surfaced decades later in a private collection. The last entry, written in pencil and smudged with water damage, read simply, "We have reason to believe our route was known before departure. If these words are found, let them know we sailed with faith, not certainty." Naval historians still debate whether MW-10 was a sanctioned diversion, a classified decoy to draw Axis attention from other convoys, or an intelligence failure so severe it was buried under secrecy. Some point to the intercepted message received by the Naiad on her final night, using an outdated British cipher, as proof of deliberate deception, possibly from within Allied ranks. Others insist it was merely a tragic coincidence of timing and technological error. In 1978, a Royal Navy Review Board quietly reopened the MW-10 case after satellite mapping of the Mediterranean detected anomalies on the seabed consistent with wartime wrecks. But the findings were never published. The official statement read, "Search operations inconclusive." Today, divers exploring the waters south of Crete still report hearing faint echoes on sonar, patterns that resemble Morse code, repeating at irregular intervals. Some dismiss it as geological noise. Others, particularly veterans of the Royal Navy's old Malta convoys, smile knowingly and call it the voices of the lost. For modern historians, the lesson of MW-10 lies not in its disappearance, but in what it revealed about wartime secrecy and sacrifice. The men of that convoy sailed without recognition, their mission erased from the records but not from memory. They carried hope across a sea of shadows, ordinary sailors caught between strategy and silence. The war moved on. Malta survived. The Allies turned the tide. Yet the Mediterranean still keeps its secrets. Beneath its calm blue waters, where sunlight fades into darkness, the story of the lost convoy endures, an unmarked grave for the men who never reached Malta, and a reminder that in war, not every battle leaves witnesses behind.